Hey everyone, I've got a weird shootout for you, and you're probably going to say that this type of comparison is unnecessary, but I'd actually argue that it is necessary, it is important, because this is a record that hasn't had a quality reissue in about 20 years. Before I get into, I guess, what that record is, although I'm sure you could probably get it from the title of this video, let's have a listen to just a short clip. So many of us who love jazz music and listen to it a lot will probably recognize that music as Bill Evans, and it is from the Waltz for Debby record, which is the sort of companion to Bill Evans's Sunday at the Village Vanguard. Both are just absolute classics, and especially in recent years, these records have just gone through the roof. They're difficult to find almost in really any iteration. If you can find it on vinyl, odds are it's probably one to grab. And the reason why, as far as I can tell, is that there just haven't been very many reissues. So the last one I would say of note was by Analog Productions, but that was 20 years ago. And otherwise, really the bulk of the reissues starting from I think around 1984 up into the 2000s have been by Original Jazz Classics, or OJC. So for those of us who collect original jazz records, usually there's a lot of sort of side-eye cast at OJC. The interesting thing is that this is a label that existed for a long period of time, and actually a number of the early recordings of a variety of different albums were actually a completely all analog reissues. And only more recently have they started leveraging some of the digital copies in order to make their pressings. And so the other day, I was in a record store here locally in Atlanta, and I came across this copy right here. And anybody who is familiar with OJC, they recognize this, this big kind of hype sticker, if you will, and recognize it as an OJC pressing. But for records like this, for something that is well loved as Waltz for Debby, this is a worthy pickup. If you can find this in OJC, I mean, this is one to get. And actually, as far as I can tell, this is about a mid-'80s pressing of Waltz for Debby, and I think it might be the very first OJC release. I could be wrong. It's difficult to tell. You're always looking at like the run out and seeing what's scribed there, but at the very least, it's definitely a mid-'80s Waltz for Debby. And I can't really tell, and I did some research to figure out if this was actually a analog, from the original master's reissue, and it's difficult to tell. But when I found this, and the fact that I already had a copy, I figured, what the hell? Let's do a shootout, and I think as we've seen, and or at least as I believe with Kind of Blue, and how the original isn't always necessarily the best reissue, I thought it would be worthwhile to do a comparison. Either way, I'm keeping this OJC. Like, let's be real, that's going to be my playing copy. And one of the reasons why I wanted a quote unquote playing copy is because I do have an original pressing of this record. And this is one that I picked up in a collection buy, probably a topic for a later video, because it was kind of a ridiculous buy. But the cool thing about this one, this particular copy, is what you can see right here. So promotion copy, and therefore it has the corresponding white label, which is always fun to see, right? So this is obviously a pretty sexy copy, in terms of it being not only original and it's mono, but it's the promo, and it happens to just be in really stellar shape. I always hesitate to say unplayed, right? You hear unplayed condition. It's like, I couldn't tell you the difference looking at a record, whether it was played once or played 30 times. I have no idea, as long as nobody dropped it. But as far as I can tell, it's a very nice copy. And the OJC copy looks something like this. also just really stellar condition. And so I thought it would be exciting to hear, this great recording. It's a quiet recording. It's a trio, and it has that kind of audience noise because it was recorded live at the Village Vanguard. It's really nice to be able to get something that is clean and doesn't have any sort of scratches or anything that's going to sort of disrupt the sound because it's so quiet. So I thought that this would be not necessarily a fair comparison, but something worthwhile doing, simply because, if anybody wants one of these records, you're borderline, going to be picking from these OJCs. I mean, even the Analog Productions copy from 2002 goes for hundreds of dollars. So if you're going to get this on vinyl, you might find it on an OJC. And so what I wanted to find out is, what is the difference between these records, an original, to be fair, mono, and an OJC stereo? What are the merits, and is this OJC thing, does it even sound good? Is it even worthwhile? So that's what we're going to get into with this shootout. All right, so let's start out with the OJC. This was put out by Fantasy Records. That was the parent company. The very first thing I'm gonna say about this particular record is that you kind of have to get past that first track in order to do a comparison. And the reason why is that the first track just sounds really flat. Not like flat versus sharp, but just not very engaging. And it's strange. It's almost like they didn't get the levels right when they were sort of putting together this reissue, because by track 2 it's actually much more dynamic, and so it's kind of unfortunate to hear that. But generally speaking, on this stereo release, the piano is very much in the right. The rhythm is in the left. The instrumentation is separate, but not necessarily detailed. In fact, I don't know that I hear that much that is particularly detailed, especially in that first track. The drums are pretty washed out. The sort of swirling brushes are one dimensional, and I think as the album continues, and certainly as you get into track 2, there is a little bit more detail. For example, you can hear not only sort of the sound of the drums, but even this idea that the brushes, as they swirl back and forth, that there's actually dynamics even to that, which is kind of interesting. Otherwise, I'm actually pretty impressed with this reissue. It's quite a quiet record in terms of sort of extraneous noise. I mean, you can still hear the audience at times. It isn't like they're disruptive. I mean, this is one of those recordings that's sort of famous for, clinking of glasses. And you can hear the audience, but when you want to hear the music, whoever it was that put together this reissue made sure that you could hear the music, that you weren't going to, the audience noise is not going to be dominant. There's not a noise floor to this. It is a quiet record, which I think does the subject matter, does justice to the subject matter. And generally speaking, I think that this is well done. I mean, Bill Evans sounds great. The bass solos throughout sound quite good. Definitely detailed. I think that this is quality. It's unfortunate that first track doesn't really stand up, but the rest of it, if this is the only copy that I had, I think that I would be happy with it. It does sound good. It sounds good in stereo, and no real complaints. All right, so on to the original. So this is the 1962 U.S. Original on Riverside. The first thing that I'll say to sort of counter what I said about the OJC is that the first track here, the issue with it not being dynamic, there isn't that issue here. The bass is full and rich. The sustains are there. The cymbals have that kind of, that almost like hotness to them that makes them kind of shimmer. Funnily enough, there isn't really a noise floor even with the original, which is kind of interesting because I feel like a lot of recordings that were sort of cut sort of hot. There is a noise floor, a little bit of sort of pervasive noise throughout, and that just doesn't really exist here. It really was recorded well despite the fact that it was done live. To the extent that there is extraneous noise, it's the audience. Similar to the OJC, I think the audience presence is not as noticeable as I would have expected. What else? What else? I mean, the detail around the bass with the sort of hard plucking lets you really hear the noise of the string as it's being plucked, which I think is fun. The drums are much more engaging than the OJC. I know that for a fact. They just seem punchier. Generally speaking, if you're sort of considering this idea of stereo versus mono, I think I actually prefer mono in this case, which is odd, but I mean I think it's because the stereo separation in the OJC is a little maybe too distinct for me, whereas the mono just feels really well balanced and sort of lifelike. I find even the room noise on this pressing to have more detail. So I mentioned the clinking of glasses in the other one. But even that just doesn't seem dimensional. It's like the clinking of glasses has its own dynamics in terms of in terms of volume, which is a silly thing to pay attention to, but it is interesting. So you know where I stand. The original sounds better. It just does. The fact that it's mono, I think is one of the big pluses. But really, it's hard to get past when you first put this record down, and the first track being so sort of unengaging on the OJC. Otherwise, like I said, I do prefer mono. I think it is more detailed. And it's surprising for a record this old to sound, I think, as good as it does. But I think that's part of the testament of why this album is so well loved. It's like I said, it's a classic. This and Sunday at the Village Vanguard are absolute classics. I would say that they are must-owns if you're into jazz. And the other sort of glaring takeaway from this is that I think we need another reissue, probably of both of these. I'm probably ignoring some reissues that were done in other markets, potentially in Europe or Japan. But if you're talking about what we have access to here in the US and you're looking at these OJC records and you have that 2002 Analog Productions, which is 45 RPM, I've never heard it. I would love to hear it. And actually, I want to say that Analog then put out a 33 RPM single disc a little bit later. But either way, these things seem to be scarce. It feels like we need a nice treatment of both Waltz for Debby and Sunday at the Village Vanguard. So that is my plea, because I will be one of those people who are getting in line to get a quality reissue. Because again, I mean, I do play this original promo, but I make sure to do sparingly. So, I'm not one of those people who just, who seals their records and keeps them in a vault to never be heard. But I just love to see what another company could do, even if it's Analog Productions putting something back in print, because they do such a good job. So that's my wish. But anyway, those are my thoughts on this particular shootout. I hope you enjoyed. Please do subscribe to my channel, and I will see you next time.